Hi, I'm Ed Ehrenhuster. I've been involved in the finances at UCN for 6 years or so now as finance chair and finance secretary. And before we start the actual conversations for the cottage conversations, people ask me to put together a financial background, specifically a financial background of the last 10 to 15 years. We don't need to know what happened in 1963 to figure out what we want to do today. But it would be useful to look at the last decade and a half. So for our presentation goals, we are going to focus on just the facts on what happened, okay? Because we want to not repeat history that didn't work. So understanding what has worked and what hasn't will help when we figure out what we want to do going forward. One thing we do not want to do in this setting is do a bunch of second guessing or judging, because the goal is to move forward. I'd be happy to debate what's happened in the past, and that might be useful in another setting, but right now that would just sidetrack us from our goal of figuring out ideas to do now. All right, so I've broken it up into a few periods. I will say, as I mentioned, I've been involved in the finances for about 6-7 years now. So these early decades I wasn't directly involved with, but I have talked to a lot of people. So there might be some things off by a year or so or off by a tiny bit, but overall this should be pretty accurate. So in the early 2000s, UCM was growing fairly quickly. A decision was made by us to add on to the building so that we could expand and handle future growth. And then in the middle of building that addition, the property to the north went up for sale, and the owner came to us and gave us a chance to buy it before it hit the market. And we decided that it would be good for a number of reasons, which I won't go into now because we're not judging. But that was purchased for roughly $300,000. And another thing that gets lost sometimes is that at that time in UCM's history, we had an anchor tenant that was renting space from us on a regular basis to the tune of $20K a year. And we hadn't put forth a lot of effort to find that anchor tenant. So we had more revenue, a nice revenue stream coming in. And, heck, we didn't try that hard to get them. If for some reason they would leave, it shouldn't be that hard to find another one. All right. Looking at the next 4 years or so, growth slowed down. I don't have exact numbers. I cannot find budgets from those years. But I do know that the rate of growth went down quite a bit. The anchor tenant left, and we still to this day have not found a replacement, which has hurt our incoming revenue. Our minister at the time, Elena Reg, retired, and that hurt in a couple ways. Okay, people come to UCN for a lot of reasons, and just like any other church, and one of the reasons that some people come to church is because they feel a direct connection to the minister. In that time, they came for Elena. Some people come now for Julie. And so we lost some members when she left. We also had a year of an interim minister before we found Reverend Forrest at this time. And this meant that things were pretty unsettled. Nobody knew it was coming. That makes some people uncomfortable. They might leave. They might get less involved. They might stick around but reduce their pledge because they don't feel as good or connected. And then, of course, the Great Recession. I don't think I need to explain that. Everybody here probably knows what that was about. So we took a number of hits, and by 2009, it was time to make a decision. We were running $40,000 deficits. These were clearly not a one-time blip. They weren't going to go away. And there were a couple of pretty substantial unknowns. The economy, of course, was the biggest. If you recall, people were realistically talking about a Great Depression in 2009. We didn't know when the economy would improve. We didn't even know if it would improve. We didn't know how fast it would improve, all of which has big financial implications for UCN. And Reverend Julie was, excuse me, also an unknown from a financial standpoint. By 2009, we did know who our new minister was. She had just joined us. But from a financial standpoint, we didn't know how much having a settled minister would impact our budget. It was reasonable to assume it would help, but how much it would help, was unknown because we hadn't even had a pledge drive yet with her as the minister. So there was a lot of time spent, a lot of analyzing, and what UCN came up with was a 4-year plan. We were going to sell the property to the north. We knew that we wouldn't get as much as we sold it for because the real estate market had plummeted, but we felt that it was necessary. Once we sold this property, we would take $100,000 of the sale proceeds to supplement operations. And basically it was $40,000 for the first fiscal year, 2010, 2011, and a $10,000 reduction each of the next 3 years. So 40, 30, 20, 10. And then in conjunction with that, the goal was to grow revenue to replace that money by $10,000 a year. That was, we felt, a reasonable goal. It was about 3 to 4% growth, which historically, looking at numbers, seemed achievable. We said that this had to be recurring revenue, so it had to be something we could count on. That could be increased fundraising, that could be increased pledge drive. It could not be something like a member died and left us money in their will, because while that's a great thing to have, you can't count on that again the following year. Then any other money that was used, that was gained by selling the property to the north, would be used to reduce our debt, paying down our mortgage. Okay. There was the options of supplementing operations and paying down debt were a particular point of contention. There were some people who felt all of the money should be used to reduce our debt. There were other people that felt that all the money should be used for operations and programs, and this was the balance that we decided was right. Basically splitting the money 50-50. All right, so we came up with this great plan. What happened? Well, over the next 4 years, the property was sold for a bit under $200,000. By the time we paid the realtor their commission and other sales expenses, we netted around $180,000. So our debt was reduced by $80,000 after the $100,000 was held for operations. Fundraising growth has been particularly good. The auction has been a huge success. Script has also been a success. And so on average, our income now from fundraising is about $10,000 a year higher than it was before this plan got put in place. Pledge growth, on the other hand, has gone down. We are now averaging about $10,000 a year less than we were getting before we put this in place. Rent has gone up some, a few $1,000s a year. And another thing that has to be figured in from the big picture is that our mortgage payments were reduced. When we used our $80,000 or so to pay off our mortgage, our bank said that we could reduce our payments based on the new amount of money owed. And that wound up reducing our payments by about $5,000 a year. So that leaves us at, instead of $40,000 annual deficits, roughly $30,000 annual deficits. If you look at the numbers on the previous page, that's about what it adds up to. Again, we're about $10K a year ahead between reduced expenses and increased revenue. We at the moment, going into this fiscal year, July 1st, 2014, had about $22,000 in money left over from the property sale. We are using $10,000 of that in the budget this year, and that leaves $12,000 hanging out there. Now, of course, $10,000 is a guess. We don't know if we will come in ahead of budget or behind budget, but the $12,000 leaves us a cushion. I'll note as an aside that in addition to the $12K that will be left over at the end of this year, there's another $20,000 left over from that property sale, but that's being held in CDs by our bank, and is a requirement of us to hold that as a contingent for the mortgage that we redid in 2012, so that if we don't pay, they have some way of getting some bit of money back. And we cannot touch that money until 2017. So that $20,000 is not available. But there is $12,000 in cushion. And one more thing, when I say $30,000 in annual deficits, what that assumes a normal budget. And by normal, what I mean is Reverend Julie at full-time. Some of you may recall she's at 3/4 time full this year. It assumes that we won't use any money from property sales, and it assumes that all the other staff levels and expenses stay where they are now. Okay, so that catches us up. So what are we going to do going forward? Well, that's why we're here. UCN needs to come up with some combination of increased revenue and decreased spending. We got a $30,000 shortfall. We can either come up with $30,000 a year more, we can decrease spending by $30,000, we can do any combination thereof. And I would like to emphasize that we don't need to panic yet. I've heard some people thinking we have to sell the church today. We're not at that state. We have $12,000 in cushion. But that $12,000 could go if the budget is incorrect or if some major expense comes along. So it is urgent time. We need to figure this out. We want to figure this out in time for our next budget, which seems like it's a heck of a long way off because that's next July 1st. But we start planning this budget in January. So we have to have a plan figured out for what we're going to need going forward in the next 3 to 4 months. We can come up with some details, fill them in, make minor changes, but the major decisions need to be made in the next few months. So with that, please start your conversations, and hopefully we will come up with some great ideas for how to solve these problems.